Hey, Kristen.
Hi, Mitch. Can you see me?
Yep.
Okay. I left my laptop at work. I forgot it.
Fine.
Let me see if I do
Now you're
this.
sideways. I did.
Okay, that's better, right?
Boy, everybody's piling in here. Hey, Helen.
Hi.
How are you, Ray and Penny?
Good. And you?
Well, I'm fine now.
Yeah. Now? You mean yesterday morning?
Just wanna... So, where's the dog? I don't see the dog.
Quiet. She's.
Oh, there.
Oh, you called her. Now she's got to be here.
She recognized the dog.
We took her to Rocky Neck out today, so she finally got out of the house, which
3
was
days.
after 3 days. That it's becoming critical. Can you sit?
There's Danita.
You know, with snow like this, many years ago, Phil had a dream, and we had a beagle. And in his dream, the beagle was deer hunting in snow this high.
Wow.
Can you imagine how funny that would be?
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up with a beagle. I know how they have little legs, but they do hop.
Oh, they do. They do.
Yeah, when they decide they want to run, they run.
They're on out after a rabbit.
Yeah.
Mary lost her beagle in Haley's farm one day.
Yeah. Well, we lived about 10 miles from the highway, and our beagle got killed on the highway because she ran and kept on going.
Oh, dear.
Wow.
Sad. There was one point where my sister Edna had 2 beagles, and my other sister had a beagle, and I had a beagle. So
Oh my
we all did the beagle thing.
Baying contest.
We didn't get them together like you do with cousins.
Oh, I see. Okay. That's probably good.
I'm gonna wait here on Dale. But
Ray and Penny, are you affected at all by the fire in Niantic or East Lyme?
No, what fire? I'm sorry. We're ignorant.
It's at whatever the Four Corners is.
Oh, the Flanders Four Corners?
Yeah, I guess
Oh.
that shopping center went up in flames. I could see the smoke from the highway when I was coming home in New London.
Oh, wow. Do you know which, was it the
It's the Midway Plaza.
the Midway Plaza? That's not quite the Four Corners.
Oh, is
No,
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 it's.
it's the Midway Plaza. It's,
Meeting.
Here, we
All
gotta-
right, bye.
so I got the location wrong, but I could still see the smoke.
Bible, the
No,
Jewish
that's
Bible.
closer to what?
Okay, I'll call you back later. Bye.
You'll often hear that television academic thing, but it's meaning that we're having high cases in the winter.
now we're just waiting on David.
Thank you.
Is everybody staying warm? Because it's cold tonight. Very cold.
Yeah, I'm warm, but I'm not looking forward to my gas bill.
I don't want to look at for mine either, gas or electric.
Today was the first day for us that we actually got a big input from the sun. So our greenhouse warmed the house up to 70. Thank you very much. A little free heat from the sun. We've well, duoed, I guess it was, with the Etruses on Saturday. And they were telling us about all the snow they've gotten up at Rochester.
Say Rochester, snow in Rochester is not one of those things that even is occasion for conversation.
Yeah, yeah, they seem like, oh yeah, of course we've got snow, and you know, we had it for weeks.
I remember in the 80s, there was some discussion about the fact they wanted to make the University of Rochester more marketable. And they thought that maybe they're changing the name because when people hear the word Rochester, they think it's a cold and forbidding place. So they were talking about some new name for the university, and the president at the time was a guy named O'Brien. And they thought this was a really ploy on his part to get the university named after him because you could call it O'Brien's and it would sound like a pub.
Indeed, what kind of education were they trying to sell?
College.
Yeah, anything
Yeah,
people
yeah.
pay for.
Yeah.
It's all in the marketing.
I know
Did
it.
Dave mention if he'd be here tonight?
We said, well, we'll see you on Monday, and he didn't say
Oh.
anything that wasn't going to happen. So I thought that was the case.
Carol? Hello, Carol.
Is my audio is on?
Mhm.
Yes.
Can you hear us? We can hear you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Someone probably ought to talk so she knows when she can hear it.
Can you hear us, Carol? Knock 3 times.
Knock 3 times if you can, twice if you can't.
There's Helen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me on the other side?
What happened last week? Was it volume control thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
she had the volume turned way down.
Maybe she needs to
Hopefully she's checking that
get another
again.
sign that says, turn your volume up.
Was a good sign.
It was.
Well, actually, the guy that made it isn't here.
Well, Mitch, you could make a sign.
If I- Looks like she's messing with it.
Diane, thank you for coming last night and and dealing with things that need to be
There
dealt
he
with
is.
so that we didn't have to.
26 people, that's all? That was so weird.
Oh, yeah.
I think they thought they were closed.
You know, this is almost Murphy's Law or whatever. The minute we get extra,
I don't know what's
we
going
think
on
we're gonna
here.
have a big crowd,
Okay.
then they don't show.
Right.
Hey, hi Mitch, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, David. I did. Carol is working on her volume again.
Oh, really?
You have your sign from last time?
I had a problem with something locking up here. Word was locking up and it wouldn't let me do anything else. Is she having problems with her volume again?
Can you hear us yet, Carol?
Now I can hear you guys. Yeah.
There you
Okay.
are. There,
Okay.
Carol.
All right, we'll have to stop talking about you.
Believe me, plenty to say.
All nice.
Looks like we got a full house. Great. So, welcome everyone. And so tonight we will be having the second part. Professor Cohen, last time he talked about the priestly tradition, and now he's going to talk about Deuteronomy. This will actually loom large when we get to the second part of the course, because what we're talking about is the Torah, first 5 books the Hebrew Bible, and the law is. And so a number of the issues that, for instance, you don't have to read many of Paul's letters to understand that the law is a big deal. What law should, are Christians bound by the law? To what extent? And that's probably one of the great debates in the early church. And the place of the law also has a place in the formation of the modern Jewish identity. So, and even something as minor as, what was Jesus doing on the night he was betrayed? Was it a Passover meal? What was the nature of the celebration, if there was one? So even that will come up. So, and so the tradition we'll talk about tonight is Deuteronomy. And again, as going back to my analogy from last week, the Bible is like is a river, and you have different tributaries coming into it, and the P tradition is one, and Deuteronomy will be another. So the next week we'll take a break from Professor Cohen, and Professor Hayes will go a little more into depth on the nature of the law and the different types of law. That's actually one of her fields of expertise. She's written some books on that. So that's where we're headed. Are there any questions? No. Okay. And we got everybody. So I'm going to start the film before I lose you. Okay, so I'm sharing the screen, sharing the sound. I talk to myself to make sure I do all the right steps.
Last time, you remember, it was a long time ago, we spoke about P. Yes, the priestly author of the priestly strand of the Torah. We encountered narratives from P. We encountered laws from P. Okay, and we spoke a little bit about the characteristics of P and P's notions of religion, focusing on temple, tabernacle, priesthood, sacrifices, holiness of the shrine, etc. We're dealing today with D. And P and D, I can promise you, in some form or other, that question is going to show up on the final, right? Because this is one of the major thematic questions to pursue in the study of the Torah. That we have two different conceptions of God, religion, the people Israel, Israel's duty to God, nature of the relationship between God and Israel. P and D represent, well, Abbott and Costello. They represent ham and eggs, whatever. These are both improper metaphors. But you understand, these are different poles, Okay, what do we mean by D? D is what we scholars call the Book of Deuteronomy, or the author of Deuteronomy, or the source of Deuteronomy. In short, Deuteronomy. That's D. What does the word Deuteronomy mean? What? Somebody said law. That's absolutely correct, but it's the second half. Right? The nomi part is law. Nomos in Greek means law. Right? So Deuteronomy is something law. And what's the deutero? Second. Yes, you know that. Right. Deutero is second. So Deuteronomy means literally second law. It comes out of the Greek translation of a phrase which appears in the book of Deuteronomy, Mishneh HaTorah, Mishneh Torah, or Mishneh HaTorah, which seem, I don't know exactly what it means, a second law, a going over of the law, or something like that. So Deuteronomy is a translation of a phrase that appears in the book. It means second law, literally second law, or perhaps repetition of the law, perhaps, nomos. That's D. Then we have something called the Deuteronomistic Author, and B suggests we should all say that out loud together. Deuteronomistic, okay, and Deuteronomistic author, right, or the Deuteronomist. The Deuteronomist, abbreviated by convention DTR, is the guy gal, but let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, it's a guy, right? The guy who wrote the Deuteronomistic history, which literarily speaking begins with the Book of Deuteronomy itself, to which I return, but we usually use the term Deuteronomist to refer to the narrator of the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. These are the 4 books which appear in your Bible right after the Torah. And according to most modern scholars, this was once a single literary unit, beginning with Deuteronomy, goes straight into Joshua, straight into Judges, straight into Samuel, straight into Kings. This was written by a single school of authors called the Deuteronomistic school, and these are Deuteronomistic writers or Deuteronomistic narrators, until something dramatic happened and somebody cut the link between Deuteronomy and Joshua, and Deuteronomy wound up as the last book in the Torah, and Joshua wound up as the first book in the next section. So without changing a word, whoever did that dramatically affected the fortunes of these books. Deuteronomy now becomes part of the Torah. Joshua through Kings becomes just history books. Okay, whether what I just said is true, factually true, historically accurate, or what I just said is simply a pack of lies, right, made up by modern Bible scholars, I leave for you to determine. Because needless to say, of course, we don't know. This is all a conventional theory which is widely accepted by modern Bible scholars. And indeed, there's no question, if you read Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, you notice numerous stylistic, numerous literary, numerous theological, numerous conceptual links with the Book of Deuteronomy. That's a no-brainer. That's right there on the surface. So the simplest explanation is it was once a single thing. But that's the simplest explanation. It's not the only explanation. Okay, so we have the Deuteronomy and then the Deuteronomist. Starting next week, we'll be looking at Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings and talking about the Deuteronomistic history and focusing on some of the most famous episodes in that history. So let's now look. Today we're doing not DTR, the Deuteronomistic history. Today we're doing the Book of Deuteronomy. What is the Book of Deuteronomy? Deuteronomy is a series of farewell discourses of Moses. That's how the book begins. These are the words of Moses. These are the words that Moses spoke. We have a series, that's not one long speech, it's a series of farewell orations of Moses to the Israelites. In this sermon, he has sermons, he has historical retrospective, reminding the Israelites of things that have happened to them, and he has a long series of laws. And at the end, finally, we get some blessings and curses, where Moses says, if you're good boys and girls, God will bless you. If you're bad boys and girls, God will punish you. And some final poems. And then the book ends with the death of Moses. Moses, of course, did not make it into the promised land. He can ascend the mount and look in the distance and see it. But a very romantic vision, right, of the great man who doesn't quite achieve what he'd always dreamed of achieving and just falls a bit short. And it's the next generation that will succeed. Joshua leads the people in, not Moses. And that's where Moses dies. Moses is buried, and no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Why do you think Scripture says that? Just an idea just popped into my head. Why do you think Scripture goes out of its way to say that Moses dies and no one knows where he's buried? Those are the last verses of the Book of Deuteronomy. Why is it important that we know that nobody knows where he's buried? The author wants to make sure there is no Moses cult. People may be claiming they know where Moses' death place is and his tomb is a shrine, but that verse is saying, no, it's a lie. There is no Moses cult because there is no Moses shrine. And nobody knows where he's buried. Okay. There are various hints in various passages that the Torah is aware that people might want to divinize Moses. And it's trying to emphasize Moses is a man. Moses is just a regular guy, and he died. Okay, slight digression. An interesting point, though. So the book begins, these are the words of Moses. So of course the question will be asked, well, did Moses say these things? Well, if you are a traditionalist, of course, then you believe that Moses is, quote, the author of the book of Deuteronomy. Maybe not in an editorial sense, actually writing down the words, but the stuff that's in the book of Deuteronomy, Scripture attributes to Moses. And in fact, Moses said these things. That's true if you are a Jewish traditionalist or a Christian traditionalist. And indeed, the idea that Moses is the author of the whole entire Torah ultimately goes back to Deuteronomy. Namely, it's Deuteronomy which claims that these are the words of Moses. Therefore, the book of Deuteronomy is from Moses. Therefore, it winds up that the entire Torah is attributed to Moses. Deuteronomy, after all, being a part of the Torah, Moses wrote Deuteronomy. I guess he wrote the whole thing. Now that process of Moses' enlargement, or the enlargement of Moses' role in the formation of the Torah, you can see in the Bible itself. The Torah itself not. The Torah itself clearly attributes to Moses the words of Deuteronomy, whereas Genesis through Numbers, it only does various paragraphs here and there, but it does not attribute anything like authorship to Moses. But in the latest books of the Bible, we can see already, in the book of Nehemiah and elsewhere, we can see that people are attributing the book of the law, Sefer HaTorah, the book of instruction, or Sefer Torah Moshe, or Sefer Moshe, right? These later books refer to a scroll, a book of Moses. So if you are a traditionalist, you are very comfortable with that because you see the process. Deuteronomy is from Moses, the entire Torah is from Moses. If you are not a traditionalist, if you are a modern Bible scholar, then, of course, you don't believe that Moses wrote the first 4 books of the Torah. That we've discussed at some length already, right? Some anonymous redactor put it together. And you probably also don't believe that Moses wrote the speeches and sermons and historical retrospectives and laws and the poems that are part and parcel of the book of Deuteronomy. In fact, if you're a modern Bible scholar, you know something amazing about the book of Deuteronomy, but we don't know about any other book of the Torah. We know exactly when it came into being. Because all modern Bible scholars agree that the key to understanding the book of Deuteronomy is its origin in that fateful day of the reign of King Josiah, right, when they're doing temple renovations in the temple, and then the court scribe comes running to the king and says, "Master, master, master, look what I found." That's actually a very loose paraphrase. That's more or less what it says in the Book of Kings. Look what I found. We're redoing the foyer, and getting the painter and the plasterer guys are all here, and look what we found. Now, it doesn't say that they found the Book of Deuteronomy, but the rhetoric of the whole passage, and indeed the content and the events that transpire afterwards, surely. And this time I'm saying surely with all intention. Surely this is the book of Deuteronomy. Now, modern Bible scholars then, so that's a fact, quote unquote, I would say. That's an anchor point. That's an Archimedean point upon which we can stand. 621 BCE, the book of Deuteronomy is discovered in the temple. Now, does that mean, class, that Deuteronomy was written in 622 BCE?
No.
Well, many modern Bible scholars say so, right? That there was a forgery by some pietist priests who were trying to promote their program, and they forged the book of Deuteronomy, slipped it into behind the wall somewhere inside the temple, waiting for it to be discovered, right, shortly thereafter. That part, I would say already, well, that's now a theory. That's a hypothesis. That's a suggestion. That's a conjecture. Maybe, maybe not. What, Professor Cohen, are you suggesting Moses wrote this book and hid it in the temple and it was there for centuries until it was rediscovered? No, I'm saying I don't know. I'm also saying that the book of Deuteronomy is a very complicated book. It's not the kind of books written by some nefarious priests in the dark of night in their hidden hideaway, right, which they write a single composition. It's not. It's a multi-layered composition. So the book of Deuteronomy has a complicated history too, which of course I don't know, and I'm tempted to say nobody knows. right? This is all being conjectural. So I'm not going to pursue that point. I'll simply point out right now that Book of Deuteronomy has sources, i.e. there are different hands that are contributing to what Deuteronomy has. Good. Let's now, so what are the major themes in Deuteronomy? And let's see how various strands contribute to the formation of the book. That I mean not the literary formation of the book, but rather its content, its ideas. Okay, so let's start. The book certainly represents the interests of the Jerusalem priesthood, because one of the most striking characteristics of the Book of Deuteronomy is its emphasis on the centralization of the cult. Centralization of the cult. What's the word cult mean again, class? Okay, so cult is that which we do to keep the gods happy. That's really in a nutshell. Right. The things that we do to follow the commands of the gods, the deity, so as to keep the gods happy. So the rains will come and the crops will grow. That's the cult. In the case of ancient Israel, the cult means the worship of the Lord in the temple, which means sacrifices, which I spoke about last week. So Deuteronomy's main point, the classic chapter is Deuteronomy 12, is that the cult, the sacrificial worship of God, is to take place in only one place. The place in which God has chosen or shall cause his name to dwell. A phrase that appears half dozen times in that chapter. If you're going to slaughter an animal as a sacrifice, that act must take place inside the chosen place. Outside it is a sin. Now remember Leviticus 17. I spoke about this that very mysterious chapter where, according to Leviticus, every act of slaughter is defined as sacred slaughter, and every act of sacred slaughter must take place in the shrine, in the central shrine. Deuteronomy has a much more reasonable definition. No, if it's a sacred act of slaughter, it must take place in the central sanctuary. True. But if you just want a hamburger, you can go to the backyard and slaughter your animal and eat it. Just don't eat the blood. Just make sure you don't eat the blood. But you can slaughter any animal, have a hamburger, have a party feast, have a family feast. Thanksgiving's coming. Go right ahead. You don't have to go to the central shrine just to eat meat. So Deuteronomy has a certain strong notion of centralization. The cult transpires in only one place. That one place is the place in which God has chosen for his name to dwell. And outside it, you may not offer sacrifice to God. You may eat meat, but you may not offer sacrifice to God. Deuteronomy, therefore, has the notion of pilgrimage. 3 times a year, you are to come up to the central sanctuary and bring with you your offerings and present them to God, and or eat there. Even Pesach, Passover, which you remember in Exodus chapter 12, the Israelites are doing that by clan, clustered around each tent. Each tent has doorposts. You daub the doorposts, right? Scattered tents. In Deuteronomy, even Passover, Pesach, becomes a pilgrimage festival. So, who gains by this approach, class? Right, cui bono. You know cui bono? Cousin of Sonny Bono? Who's Sonny Bono, you're going to ask me next. I can tell it. Okay. You're too young. Okay. So who's cui bono? C-U-I-B-O-N-O, Latin. For whose benefit? Who stands to gain by this legislation? Who stands to gain by saying you can't bring a sacrifice anywhere except here in Jerusalem, and 3 times a year every male Israelite should come on pilgrimage with money in his pocket, schlepping along a lamb and a cow and this and that, and sit here and eat and pay money and rent an apartment and get a hotel and buy souvenir trinkets for children, right? And aid the local economy, right? Who benefits from this? The priests of the temple, of course. Now, theologically, I would say, the idea there's only one sacred spot in which to offer sacrifice to the Lord, that is a theology which I'm going to call one temple for the one God. Deuteronomy does not use that phrase. Josephus does. But it is a very wonderful phrase. I'll come back to it again later today, and also I'll come back to it on Friday. one temple for the one God, or monism. We have one God, there's one sacred place where you're bringing sacrifices. So theologically, I understand it. However, there are incidental economic benefits to a certain group of people, right, from this perspective. But, so I see Jerusalem priests here. However, having said that, it's odd that nowhere does the word Jerusalem appear anywhere in the book of Deuteronomy. If I had been in Jerusalem, my priesthood living at the time, I would have figured out a way for Moses to say flat out, black on white, and by the way, that one place in which God has chosen for his name to dwell, where the central shrine is going to be located, that place is Jerusalem. They didn't do that. This is very puzzling. So some people have argued that this is evidence that the original, you know the way modern Bible scholars think, everything's always a conspiracy, right? So they think, aha, originally in the book of Deuteronomy, it probably didn't mean Jerusalem. It probably meant someplace else. And then it gets transferred to Jerusalem. What would have been that someplace else? Aha, modern Bible scholars continue. Aha, probably some other cult site that Deuteronomy itself, of course, abhors. Probably one of those forbidden cult sites up in the north. So it's possible we have, as some scholars have argued, that the book of Deuteronomy, paradoxically, which is the classic endorsement of the exclusivity of Jerusalem, paradoxically might have origins outside Jerusalem, up in the northern kingdom, and then gets transported after the Israelites of the north are exiled. What year was that, class? 721, right. So roughly a century before, the day refugees from the north would have brought with them some Deuteronomy, some text out of which Deuteronomy is going to grow. And that explains why there's no Jerusalem in it. But surely, though, these priestly forgers could have stuck in Jerusalem. I don't know. Anyway, this is a puzzle. This endorsement of Jerusalem doesn't mention Jerusalem. It also has a very loose view of the priesthood. Priests, Levites is a phrase that distinguishes Deuteronomy. If I were the Jerusalemite priesthood, I would have, again, had after all, I'm a Cohen, so these are my ancestors we're talking about. Maybe. Or not. But had I been there, I would have told them, hey guys, let's make it clear. It's Jerusalem and not those Levites who want to horn in on our privileges and take away our priestly offerings, right? You tell the Levites they're second-class citizens and mind their manners, right? We priests are in charge here. No, Deuteronomy does something odd where it lumps priests and Levites together. No one, as far as I know, has explained that. So, first strand is this priestly strand emphasizing exclusivity of the central shrine. We're a little puzzled by this, but there it is. So, priests. Next group, scribes. Deuteronomy has a very strong scribal element. And may I remind you, it was a royal scribe who actually found the book, or dare I say it, wink, wink, found the book, right, and brought it to the king with that message, "Sire, look what I found." That was a royal scribe. And indeed, there's a scribal element in the book. Deuteronomy, if you take out your concordance, footnote, what's a concordance? You can have a Shakespeare concordance, you can have a Milton concordance, you can have, Jack London concordance, you can have a Bible concordance, all kinds of, a Homer concordance. What's a concordance?
It has words and what verses.
Right, so I don't know what the official definition is, but the word is used as it's a reference tool, right, that gives you all the usages of a given set of words within a given corpus. So take out your concordance of the Hebrew Bible, look up the root write, W-R-I-T-E, or in Hebrew, katav. You will find most of the references to the verb katav in the Torah appear in the book of Deuteronomy. Who's writing things down? Deuteronomy. Who gives a command to the king to write down the words of the Torah in a book? Deuteronomy. Who writes down the words of the sacred song? It's in Deuteronomy, right? Who takes this sacred book, scroll, and puts it in the ark of the Lord? It's Deuteronomy. Who writes down the words on slabs, on pillars as the Israelites crossed the Jordan? It's Deuteronomy. So we have an emphasis on writing and on a written culture. So that's Scribes. It's part of its vision of culture and religion is writing things down. So I see scribes here at work, not just our Jerusalemite priests, but scribes. Puzzle, but where are the scribes? Does the book of Deuteronomy ever once mention the social class of scribes? No. So the book is scribal in culture, except that the noun, scribes, are missing. You get the idea, class? Shaye Cohen is describing to you why the book is interesting. It seems not to quite hit the nail on the head. There's something mysterious going on in this book. We have priests without Jerusalem. We have scribal culture without scribes. Next. Moses, in one of those farewell orations, has a long stretch of several chapters running, which are just laws. Laws, rituals, right? Thou shalt, thou shalt nots. Modern scholars and ancient readers were all puzzled by what are these laws, what's included, what's not included, how are they arranged, how do we get from one law to the next. This is all completely mysterious. I mean, you can recognize certain clusters of laws, but for the most part, these laws are completely, it seems, chaotic, the way they're arranged. No one has figured it out. People have tried very hard. There are various theories out there. Okay, what's the content of these laws? Well, we can see some themes in these laws. We have a limit of the power of the king and the prophet. This is worth talking about for a second. Deuteronomy is the only book in the Torah that talks about these two important sources of authority. One is the king and one is the prophet. The prophet we'll talk about in a couple of weeks down the road. The prophet is the man, in this context it is a man, right, who claims authority based on direct revelation. So the priest has his institutional home in the temple. The prophet has what Max Weber would call charisma. And then we have the king. Deuteronomy on the one hand, on the other hand. On the one hand, Deuteronomy says, appoint for yourselves a king. Have a king. And then Deuteronomy immediately does something absolutely amazing, where it says, but the king may not do this. The king may not do that. The king may not do this, and the king may not do that. Where Deuteronomy promotes the theory or the notion of kingship, but at the same time, Deuteronomy has the idea that the king himself is subservient to the law. The king is not above the law. The king must in turn obey the law. And in fact, what does the king do in his spare time, according to that paragraph in Deuteronomy? He's supposed to write out a copy of the entire Torah, whatever that means exactly in the book of Deuteronomy. Probably means the book of Deuteronomy. He should write out a copy of the entire Torah and keep it with him in his bosom at all times. Like Sam Irvin, I'm just a country Santa from North Carolina, right, who walks around with a copy of the Constitution in his pocket. So the king is supposed to walk around with a copy of the Torah in his pocket to remind himself there is a law. So interesting, yes? As Deuteronomy tries to negotiate the place of the king in the political constellation of ancient Israel. And is the only book in the Torah to even mention the king. The prophet we'll come back to in a couple of weeks. Deuteronomy has a strong charitable aspect to it. It refers repeatedly to widows and orphans. Widows, orphans, and Levites. Levites, you recall, are landless, which you, Israelite squire, Israelite farmer, you are to look out for the less fortunate and make sure that they have something to eat, right? On the widows and orphans. Part of that is this merciful streak, or this humanistic streak, is our various laws of what you call social welfare. Not to return a runaway slave. A law that was widely quoted by abolitionists in America in the 19th century. Right? Not to return a runaway slave, according to Deuteronomy, is prohibited. Not to take away a chick from the nest while the mother bird is there. The rabbis say that's nothing to do with mercy. That's just a decree of the Holy One. Blessed be He. It's a strange law, but there it is. Don't take away the chick if the mother bird is there. That's in Deuteronomy 2. So we can see some themes in this Deuteronomic legislation, some which are actually quite fascinating, and we wish we knew exactly where they're coming from or what groups are behind these laws. What's interesting to see is what's not there. So Deuteronomy has a central shrine. Deuteronomy has priests. But all those sacrificial rules we get in the book, we get in P, Deuteronomy doesn't mention. No patience for it. The Tamid continual offering, which for P is the central daily offering, not mentioned by Deuteronomy. All those purity rules that come with the emphasis on priests, temple, holy site, Deuteronomy has almost none. Almost none. Corpse impurity, not there. Impurity of menstruation, childbirth, not there. Purity of ejaculation, that is there, one verse. So Deuteronomy has a scaled down set of purity rules and a complete de-emphasis on all those sacrificial requirements from P. And yet, of course, we're emphasizing the central shrine. So Deuteronomy has a different vision of how holiness manifests itself in Israelite society than P does. A fun thing to do, and in fact some of you might do this on your second paper, is to do compare and contrast between Deuteronomy's version of laws and an earlier version of the laws, either in the Covenant Code or in P or just earlier in the Torah. Deuteronomy has its own particular take on numerous laws, which are clearly the same law, quote unquote, the same, but not the same at all. Right, so that's fun to do, and maybe some of you will do that. Okay, so we have this legal material with its own set of themes. We don't know exactly what group is behind this legal material. Some of it are priests, of course. Maybe some scribes, again, get in there, but legal material, Deuteronomy has a vision, at least in some extent, in its retelling of the laws. Deuteronomy has a wide variety of laws and a wide variety of topics. We don't know where they come from. Again, in its literary setting, this is Moses speaking to the people of Israel, and Moses speaks about himself in the first person singular in some of these laws, notably the laws about the prophet, right? Kamoni, right, he says, right? Moses says, God will raise up a prophet like me, Moses is saying. So Moses is talking in the first person, that's the literary setting. Moses, first person singular, talking to the Israelites about God. The setting is still Moses before he dies in the wilderness. However, we understand, presumably, these laws were actually meant to be applicable to Israelites living in Judah in the 7th century BCE. But who actually wrote these laws and how these laws came about, we don't know. Right, the Covenant Code back in Exodus seems to have all kinds of connections with Near Eastern law codes. Deuteronomy is doing something different. So P is doing something different. Deuteronomy is doing something different. The Covenant Code, these are all not the same. They all wind up cheek by jowl neighbors in the Torah. That's what makes the Torah such a fascinating book. Or let's put it this way, if Moses wrote the whole thing, then Moses changed style and orientation periodically. If you are a traditionalist, you have to say that. Deuteronomy is a great book. It really is terrific. Okay, I gave you my editorial advice. Wisdom traditions. Right, lurking behind parts of Deuteronomy are wisdom traditions. What are wisdom traditions? Well, we'll come back to this in a couple weeks. So write the stuff down in your notes or pay attention, and then try to remember it when we get to wisdom in a few weeks down the road. Fundamentally, wisdom teachers are those who teach that virtue is its own reward. The reward of living a good life is you lived a good life. The reward of being moral, pious, God-fearing, upright is that you're moral, pious, God-fearing, and upright. That's your reward. We de-emphasize this mechanical notion that good boys get punished or good boys get rewarded, they get a gold star, they get a silver dollar, they get a bag of candy, and bad boys get demerits and lose points. And no, we don't think that way. We wisdom teachers, we don't think in such mechanical terms, right? Virtue or piety is its own blessed state. Fear the Lord. Be good boys and girls, and you'll have a good life. That summarizes the book of Proverbs. I just told you right now, that's a summary of the entire book of Proverbs. You don't believe me? Start to read the book of Proverbs. You'll notice it's rather repetitive. That's the theme of the entire book of Proverbs. So there are a couple of passages in Deuteronomy where he uses this rhetoric, the rhetoric of wisdom. Right, sage advice, good counsel. Advice to you, what do I need to do to lead a good life? The most important part is the chapter 4, which is a wonderful sermon. It's what it is, it's a sermon, right? In which the author, Moses, if you insist, right, tells the Israelites that the word of the Lord is your wisdom. Ki hi chochmatchem ubinatchem leinei ha'amim, right? This is your chokhmah, this is your wisdom, your bina, your understanding. I mean, doing the Torah, this is what it constitutes wisdom. Follow these instructions and you'll have a good life. Part of that theme, I think, is the theme of study and knowledge. Right? How are you going to lead a good life? Answer, you have to know what to do. Study the Torah. Meditate on it. If you study the Torah and meditate on it, keep it with you at all times. Bind it on your arms. Put it on your head. Write it onto your doorposts. Teach it to your children. Meditate on it when you lie down and when you rise up. And by doing these things, you have, well, how exactly do I phrase this? Ennobled yourself, raised your own spirituality. You have thereby, you know what to do and you will do it. And consequently, you'll have a good life. Consequently, God will reward you. But that's not the emphasis, God rewarding and punishing, is that you are now ennobled. This is striking, this motif. You will not find this motif anywhere in P. Do those nefarious priests of Jerusalem want you to meditate upon the words of the Torah day and night and internalize them and teach them to your children and write them down on your doorposts? No. Those nefarious priests say, you want to have a question? You come ask me. I'll tell you what to do. Deuteronomy has that. If there is a question which you can't answer, go consult the priest in the central shrine. That's also in Deuteronomy. But Deuteronomy has this motif of meditating on the words of God, meditating on the Torah, writing them down, teaching them to your children, internalizing them. That's also Deuteronomy. So I'm calling that wisdom as a theme, or as a motif, which is distinctively Deuteronomistic. It is hard. Distinctively Deuteronomistic, or Deuteronomic. Yeah, Deuteronomic, I guess, is what I want. Characteristic of the book of Deuteronomy. But, of course, there's a but here, of course. It is wisdom, but it's not classic wisdom, because classic wisdom does not emphasize divine retribution in a mechanical sense of good and evil get rewarded and punished. But Deuteronomy, of course, does. Deuteronomy very much has the straight connection that if you're good, rains will fall, crops will grow, and everything will be fine. And if you're sin, the rains will not fall, the crops will not grow, and you will die. I just summarized Deuteronomy 11. Right? Very much a straight connection, right? Deuteronomy is quite confident. And at the end of the book, there are these hair-raising curses, which Moses warns the Israelites. If you're bad boys and girls, these are the terrible things that will happen to you. And it is really hair-raising. So this, I would say, is very much not a wisdom mode of rhetoric. This is a old-fashioned theology, theodicy kind of rhetoric. Deuteronomy has that too. I'm not sure exactly how to make all this come out, all this work, but there it is. We'll come back to the theme of divine justice on Friday. But this is a major motif in the book of Deuteronomy. God is a just God who punishes the wicked and rewards the righteous. Okay. See, the book gets curiouser and more complicated. Next, there are traditions from the north. We modern Bible scholars are quite convinced that there are traditions from the north. Most obviously, the veneration for Shechem, which is a sacred city, and Mount Gerizim, which is right next door to Shechem. That's in the blessing ceremony at the end near the end of the book in Deuteronomy 27, right? No red-blooded Jerusalemite priest is going to go around endorsing the sanctity of Mount Gerizim up near Shechem. Do we understand each other? We don't talk about that place. That's where rival temples are, rival cult sites to here, our central shrine here in Jerusalem, the city which Moses forgot to mention by name. But there it is in Deuteronomy. So we all agree that has to come from some northern tradition, which was saying, no, here an important Israelite ceremony took place and presumably is replicated, continues to take place, here on Mount Gerizim right next to Shechem. Now that's a tip-off. Once you notice that some of the stuff might come from the northern kingdom, which was destroyed in 721, and presumably refugees fled south into Judah and probably brought these traditions with them, and these traditions wound up getting into the book of Deuteronomy. Once we have that idea in our heads, let's start to look around for other things that might come from the north. And here modern Bible scholars have argued that a very important idea that comes from the north, and this I'll come back to again on Friday, is the idea of the exclusivity of the worship of God. The idea that monolatry is not sufficient, the idea that we worship only one God and that there is only one God. If you're a traditionalist, of course, you think it was always this way. But if you're a modern Bible scholar, then for you have to explain, where do these ideas come from? Where do we see them attested? How do they develop? I discussed some of this long ago in lecture number 2. I'll discuss some of this more on Friday, at our next installment. But here, briefly, the first time you see it black and white is the famous passages in Hosea, a prophet who lived in the north in the 8th century BCE. Hosea is the one who develops the marital imagery, marriage metaphor. Israel to God is like a wife to a husband. No sleeping around. If you have a husband, that means you have exclusive loyalty to your husband. And Israel, by worshiping other gods, has proved faithless. That summarizes the first 3-4 chapters of the book of Hosea. That idea then, Israel and God is meant to be a one-to-one relationship, is spelled out clearly in the book of Hosea, and is spelled out clearly in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy's rhetoric on the oneness of God is far more pointed than anywhere else in the Torah. And this brings us back to that one temple for the one God motif. All right, this emphasis on monism. Deuteronomy has this wonderfully fascinating passage in chapter 4 that the sun, the moon, the stars, God put them there so other nations can worship them. But you don't. That's why there are sun, the moon, and stars, so nations can worship them. But you stay away, you Israelites. The sun, the moon, the stars are real, of course, but they're verboten. You may not worship them. So in Deuteronomy, we have this strong emphasis on the oneness of God, the uniqueness of God, or in chapter 4, there is none else, ein od milvado, that's it. There is only one God. And part and parcel of this set of themes, I think, is those passages in Deuteronomy which we modern people don't like. Those passages would say flat out, Israelites, when you enter the land of Canaan, remember the setting is Moses talking to the Israelites in anticipation of their arrival in the land of Canaan, right? Which Moses tells the Israelites, and when you come to the land of Canaan and find the Canaanites living there, you should wipe them out and destroy all their cult settings. None of this cultural relativism stuff, says Moses. Wipe it out. Destroy it. And the people themselves are saying, well, yeah, it looks like they're going to get destroyed too. Not to worry, class, it didn't actually happen. We'll talk about that on Monday. The Israelites didn't conquer them, they didn't wipe them out, they didn't destroy the cult sites, and they actually got together with them, and it turns out they probably are Canaanites themselves. We'll talk about this more on Monday, not to worry. But the rhetoric, though, of Deuteronomy, the rhetoric is, we Israelites, in order to remain loyal to the one true God, we need to wipe out all those 7 Canaanite nations, destroy them utterly. That's Deuteronomy, especially chapter 7, parallel Exodus 34, but Exodus 34, most modern Bible scholars think, was probably partly written under Deuteronomic influence. There you are. Kugel talks about the Assyrian vassal language, about this exclusivity of loyalty to the suzerain, right? That the rhetoric for that might come from Assyrian vassal treaties. May I remind you, Deuteronomy 6:21, this is the heyday of the Assyrian Empire, 8th, 7th centuries BCE. So Assyrian political language may have shaped some of these conceptions. Okay, that's Deuteronomy with its emphasis on oneness, the oneness of the sacred place, the oneness of the holy people, the oneness of God, and the oneness, exclusive loyalty to God. All that is part and parcel of Deuteronomy. Your argument is, but isn't all of modern Bible scholarship not just a game, but isn't it also entirely circular? Because we're using stuff from the Bible to validate theories that derive from the Bible, by which we then date the Bible so we can understand the Bible. Have we not simply come around full circle? The answer is yes. But the answer is, I don't have an alternative. This is what I got. What I got is what I got. When I can look in Assyrian vassal treaties, I can understand the rhetorical structure of the Book of Deuteronomy and some of its themes and motifs. Okay, that's helpful. Does it help me explain where Deuteronomy comes from? Not exactly, but it gives me something which I can attribute outside. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for outside references to P and D and other such things, the answer is you don't have it. We have outside references to various Israelite kings and such in Assyrian records and Babylonian records and Egyptian records, but there that's not before the 8th century. The 8th century BCE, maybe the end of the 9th, is when ancient Israel starts to become historical. Everything before that point is all literary, and and literary history itself is entirely circular based on the reading of the documents. My time is up. Read Kugel on P and D. I look forward to seeing you on Friday when we're talking about God.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing. Unmute. So I know that probably was a fair bit there. One of the things actually I did want to share with you is he did mention about the finding of the scroll and what I believe was Deuteronomy. And so you can find that in the Book of Kings. And I just want to read a little bit of extract of that so you can see here, this is the sort of paraphrased version. So this is King Josiah. He was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 31 years in Jerusalem. Now in the 18th year, they go on a bit, but they're renovating the house of the Lord. And King Josiah has the scribe Shaphan go to the high priest and have him weigh out silver to pay the workmen. And in the process of that, he goes to the high priest, and then the high priest, and this starts in verse 8, chapter 22 of 2 Kings. Then the high priest Hilkiah said to the scribe Shaphan, I have found the scroll of the teaching in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah gave the scroll to Shaphan, who read it. The scribe Shaphan then went to the king and reported to the king, your servants have melted down the silver that was deposited in the house, and they have delivered it to the overseers of the work who are in charge of the house of the Lord. The scribe also told the king, oh, by the way, the high priest Hilkiah has given me a scroll, and Shaphan read it to the king. When the king heard the words of the scroll of the teaching, he rent his clothes. That's something that even now traditionalist Jews would do if like somebody dies or something. And the king gave orders to the priest Hilkiah and to Acham, son of Shaphan, and Nachbor, son of Micah, and the scribe Shaphan, and Asaiah, the king's minister, go inquire of the Lord on my behalf and on behalf of the people and on behalf of all Judah concerning the words of this scroll that has been found. For great indeed must be the wrath of the Lord that has been kindled against us, because our fathers did not obey the words of this scroll to do all that has been prescribed for us. And then it goes on. So I would refer you again to 2 Kings chapter 22. You can see that story about the discovery of the scroll, which it doesn't say it's Deuteronomy, but it by and large, most people think that it was. So they created this story about that. On hearing that and hearing the surrounding story of any initial thoughts?
I must say I always just kept Deuteronomy as a repeat of the law. I used to tell confirmation kids, you know, Deuteronomy is do it over again. And he certainly made me realize how very complicated Deuteronomy is. It isn't just a do it over again of what they had in the law, but it was far more expansive than that. And then he brought in the idea that there was even wisdom stuff in there.
Yeah, and then there was, for instance, and do it over. I mean, that's almost that's explicit in the title, second law. So that's you'd think that, but then when you read it, for instance, that and one of the things it focuses on, for instance, is that the sacrifices, and again, sacrifices, not just any slaughter, they will take place at the place where the Lord made his name to dwell, meaning that was later interpreted to mean Jerusalem. So, you know, when you look again, when we go to the New Testament and you see everybody schlepping up to Jerusalem for various festivals, that's where that goes. And so there's this focus on the temple. Then the question becomes, you know, after 70 CE, the temple's destroyed. And you have this whole religion centered around the temple. So what's it mean to be a Jew if you don't have a temple anymore? So it gets complicated after that. And that's that's where we have, you know, the Jesus followers have one interpretation, one argument. The Pharisees who become the rabbinic school have another. But I think the other thing he mentions is the focus in Deuteronomy on the poor. You know, that's where you get all, you know, they mention widows, orphans, and Levites.
Yeah.
Yes, Carol. Yeah.
Yes, that struck me also when he said it. They include the Levites in the group of needy people.
Well, they didn't have land, so that they were sort of a public charge, if you will.
Yep.
So.
Well, I must leave because Barkley needs to go outside.
Oh,
Stay
okay.
warm,
Well,
everybody. It was a great session. Okay, good
Okay.
night.
Good night, Dale.
Night, Dale.
Night.
So Are there any other thoughts about that?
No, I mean, a lot of the book was complicated, like you were saying. One of the minor things that I hadn't thought about before was that Jerusalem is not mentioned in the book at all.
Right.
To worship, because in the past, it's been, there's one place to worship the one God in the temple. It's kind of an interesting question, why it's not there.
Maybe if it wasn't there, the whole point is that it should be one place, but when the temple's destroyed, then bring it someplace else, but it's still one place.
Yeah. When they were lost, when they were taken in exile and the temple was destroyed, they were lost because where was God?
Yeah.
God was back in the temple. And that's when they went back and found that book, that the whole city was, I guess, taken by finding the book and listening to it be read. So it was a big moment for the Israelites when they found that book. But I hadn't ever heard it mentioned. I wasn't sure that the book they found in Kings was the Book of Deuteronomy. I think that's an interesting.
Okay.
I just wonder how much of when he was talking about how do you live a good life, study and knowledge and meditate on the Torah and bring it into your heart, whether that seems to me like the Christian idea of God isn't a place. It's your ability to take God into your heart. Sounded very Christian to me when he was saying that.
Penny, just before that, I was thinking that there being only one God, I hadn't connected that you had to have a place to have only one God. Because my concept, isn't to put God in a place at all, but there's only one God.
Yeah, it seems like the Christian thoughts and have taken that little kernel and said, yeah, there's one God and he's everywhere. Not he, God is everywhere, and don't worry about one place. That's not the idea. The whole idea is to have it within you, right with you. I don't know, maybe I'm reading more into Deuteronomy than was intended.
Worshiping in one place is why they had a problem with the Samaritans who worshipped in a different place. And,
Well, the whole place thing, the north, the south.
Yeah.
Where is it? That's a dark alley as far.
Yeah.
Gets you into trouble.
Yeah, it almost seems like a follow after they followed the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, and God was present in the wanderings for 40 years. That God then stopped in one place. They were used to having God supposedly in the tabernacle or in the tent. I don't know. So it would have been odd for them to just say, okay, God can be anywhere. I think that once they stopped wandering. I don't know.
If God is in one place, then the priests can have people make pilgrimages to that place and offer sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's economically a sound way to approach it.
It kind of centralizes the religion instead of having a bunch of people in different places with no one leader. Kind of like the Catholic Church has the Pope.
Right.
It connects to all the churches around the world.
Of course, then as people spread out, I mean, even before Christ was born, the Jews had spread all over the Mediterranean region. So then it becomes less of a practical matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets awful hard to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem if you're living in Spain.
Yeah.
I think one thing that was interesting that he was teaching on tonight was about the priests. How the priests were sort of like wanted control. They wanted to control what the people were doing, which also leads you into Christianity today. It talks about the priests when Christ threw them out of the temple. So it's basically, the teaching of the priests. It's the priests wanted to control the sacrifices, so bring them to the temple.
I definitely emphasize that.
It's almost like the priests wanted to be God, to take that.
That might go a little farther than I'd be willing to go.
They were just more into control. And they're
Yes.
just more in control than being done there. Yeah.
Well, it's a fine line between unifying the people and clarifying the word and becoming dictatorial and self-serving. It's happened many times through human history.
Control.
Anybody have any problems with anything he said? Any questions? Or what do you think, Kirsten, after hearing a couple of these? I know you're just getting up to speed on it.
I am. I'm so far behind. I'm just happy to be here.
Well, don't feel bad. He keeps saying that, he explains things. He says, nobody knows this, nobody knows that. And these are people that worked on it, for their whole entire professional career.
Yeah.
He talked about how they had fewer purity laws and stuff. And it sounds almost like this is a lighter version of the law in some ways, because he talked about it being scaled back. Maybe finding that the other version in P is just too restrictive on people. I don't know. Because they did have a lot of very strict purity laws, which we heard before. I don't know, it's just interesting. I hadn't thought about Deuteronomy being, less, more scaled down.
One of the
There might have been a
things,
desire to simplify things.
Yeah.
one of the things he didn't mention was the difference in the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
Because you get one version in Deuteronomy and you get the other version in Exodus. So I know he talked about the 10 Commandments before, and I suppose he took care of it in his lecture then. But which one is in Deuteronomy? And is that the one that talks about creation, or the one that talks about the Exodus? Which set of the 10 Commandments do we get in Deuteronomy? I think it's Deuteronomy 20 as opposed to Exodus 5. But I don't have my Bible here, so I can't look it up.
That's important. Exodus is, let's see, so what we're talking about is the Sabbath Commandment. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath for the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. Your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days God made the heaven, earth, and sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So the Exodus, the basis for the 10 Commandments, the basis for the Lord's authority is basically God, the creator. So if you go to Deuteronomy, the basis for the Sabbath day is to honor the Lord, because the Lord, I'm paraphrasing, but the Lord took you out of Egypt, and it was the Lord who was active in history. So that's the distinction.
So that kind of fits with Deuteronomy being part of Joshua, Judges, First, Second Kings, etc., which is all history books.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
And let's see, Deuteronomy 5 is where you find the
Where's that table that you showed us before or talked about? That compared them all.
let's see. Just finish that thought. If you go to chapter 5, verse 15, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So, and the table, not the table.
Yeah, there was that table that compared them.
Yeah, actually, I think that's in the hardcover one. Bear with me.
Page 376.
Thank you. Probably.
Is that the table you're thinking of? Or, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So there is a different focus on why God is even to be listened to, depending on which of these texts that you use. They're not. Now, I'm not saying that they're contradictory even. Because if you, I think that's a recurring theme throughout the Bible, is that emphasizing both God as the creator and God as the God of history, and you'll see that especially in the Psalms. You'll see those references made. I think in some later session, and also in the second part, I think we'll come back to that, the issue about the two. Well, next week we'll have Professor Hayes's take on all this, and so, but this will be, I hope this will be somewhat more comfortable ground for you when she starts talking about it too. So you'll have more depth to it, I think, when you hear her lecture on the laws and stuff. So, any final questions or thoughts?
Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Night, Dave.
Good night.
Have a good time in Rochester.
Yeah, thanks.
We got as much snow as you.
We have snow coming Thursday, I think.
Oh, we got 20 inches here.
Yeah, well, we had about a foot last week and then a few lake effect storms, during the week, but not much, not like what you got.
No, snow is not even a cause for conversation in Rochester.
No, it was like 30 degrees today. That's a heat wave. This time.
Tell Sue we said hi.
Okay, I will. All right. Take care.
Good night.